Push! Welcome. I'm Eric Hoffmeister, head instructor of Athens Yoshukai Karate.
And I'm Sherry Hines, head instructor of Clark County Yoshukai Karate.
And this is a training video for our students to help orient them towards creating a self-defense routine for their Yoshukai test, and will hopefully be useful for other Yoshukai students. When you think about creating a self-defense routine, you should think about what is the real-world scenario that this may be applied for. So not thinking about synthetic situations or situations where your attacker is just going to stand there while you beat up on them, trying to think about what is actually going to happen in the real world with someone attacking you and meaning you actual bodily harm. And it should be scaled appropriately, so your responses should be scaled to the attack. Just because someone grabs your wrist doesn't mean that you should pound them into the pavement. When we're thinking about self-defense, I like to think about the diffuse, evade, attack concept, DEA. So diffuse is de-escalation, saying, I'm sorry, whatever you can to not escalate that confrontation into a physical fight. If you fail to diffuse, then evade, so trying to back away from the attacker, run if you can. Any fight that you can run away from is a fight that you've won. If and only if those have failed, you've tried diffusion, you've tried evasion, and now the person has made the decision to cause you bodily harm, your next step is attack. You need to move in and deal heavy damage to that person before they can harm you.
So in Yoshukai Karate, we use self-defense in a couple of different ways. We develop self-defense routines that are choreographed for testing, as well as for tournaments and for demonstrations. But as Sensei Hoffmeister was saying, it's really important to think about the realistic application. Otherwise, when you're practicing these self-defense routines, what's the point? You're essentially doing yourself a disservice by not practicing these very good principles. So a couple things I would suggest are to think about storytelling when you practice your self-defense and you're planning it out. So when I say storytelling, what I mean is think about a realistic situation that you might actually find yourself in. For instance, you're walking down a dark alley and someone tries to attack you, or you're trying to get into your car and someone comes up to you, or someone comes at you with a weapon, something along those lines. And then think about how you would respond. Now, a part of that also is picking your uke. So the person who performs the self-defense is known as the tori. Their partner, who the attacker, is known as uke. When you choose your uke, you want to think of a couple things. First of all, you want to think about someone who can help you grow and help you create a really excellent self-defense routine. Someone who can be a partner, who can bring something to the table, and you can work as a very collaborative process on your self-defense routine. I think those are often the best. But additionally, you want to think about someone who fits into the storyline that you're trying to tell. So if we assume a basic proposition, that a person who is smaller than you is probably not going to attack you, then you generally want to have someone who is larger than you serve as your uke. And that's essentially because we believe, as a general idea, that someone who's going to attack you is going to do so if they presume that they have an advantage over you. They're larger, they are more skilled, or they have a weapon. And so choosing someone who is larger sort of just gives you that obvious chance to practice a technique with someone who potentially could outmatch you in a physical ability. So it's an additional way to challenge yourself in coming up with a realistic self-defense routine. Finally, I would say that you really want to think about safety when you plan your self-defense routine. Obviously, in a real-world situation, that's not a particular concern as to the safety of your opponent, but in a choreographed self-defense routine, you have to think about your uke's safety. So making sure that you choose techniques that you can apply in a safe way, even when you're under pressure, even when you're performing this in front of an audience and your adrenaline is high, is very important.
Thinking about realistic attackers is a good element to consider when you're coming up with your choreography. So the attacker is probably not just going to throw a single attack and then stand there while you beat on them. Their goal is to harm you, and so they're going to be throwing wild multiple attacks. They're going to be trying to close, clench, grapple, and bring you to the ground in order to continue to beat you. So you need to be thinking, what is the attacker going to do in response to my self-defense routine? The other thing is to think about realistic defense measures. So trying to make sure that you're moving as you're applying your self-defense techniques, trying not to do techniques that require a high degree of manual dexterity. when your heart rate's at 200 beats per minute, you don't have fine motor control. So you need to be thinking about techniques that will be effective when you're stressed and scared, and also techniques that are extremely brutal and likely to cause serious physical harm to the opponent because they're trying to cause serious physical harm to you. And the faster you can end the fight, the more likely you are to survive.
In a similar note, when you're practicing and coming up with your self-defense routines for Yoshukai purposes, you want to think about using a diversity of different attacks from your uke and a diversity of different responses or defenses that you as Tori will be performing. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, in a real life situation, you're not going to know what your opponent is going to throw at you, so preparing for as many different possibilities is important. But secondly, in Yoshukai, when we use these for testing purposes or tournaments, it's an opportunity for you to display your skills at your best advantage. So trying to use multiple defenses is helpful to you, both in practice, but in also displaying those skills.
The final thing to consider when you're coming up with your self-defense routine is timing. You don't want to block an attack and then initiate your own attack, because as soon as you start blocking, you're going to be on the defensive, and they're going to eventually come through your defenses and land a strike, and then you're out. So you want to at least block while you are simultaneously attacking, or attack as your attacker is attacking. Once they've decided to cause you harm, all bets are off, and you need to attack them and attack them aggressively so that you end up as the victor in the confrontation. We're going to show you now some examples of self-defense routines that we think could use some improvement, and we'll show you some self-defense routines that apply these principles that we've talked about that will hopefully help you understand the concepts a little bit better. In the first routine, I was Tori, and Sensei Hines was Uke. And the things that I think could be improved about that, one is that I met the attack just with a single solid block. And so that would immediately start to put me on the defensive. I had both of my hands involved in that block, and as soon as I did, the attacker would immediately come in with that right hand and would probably be able to land that and then start to move in to grab me. The other thing is that I didn't move as I initiated my self-defense, so I took the full force of that attack as my block. The second thing is that my attacker just stood there while I beat her up. And again, this isn't realistic. The attacker is going to continue to move in, try to control you, and deal damage. And then last is the finishing technique. While a knee to the face is very effective and devastating, in that case, it may require more fine motor control than I would necessarily have.
And I was obviously Tori for the second technique. The problems with this technique, the things that could have been improved, I think, are that, first of all, since I often just grabs my hand, that could be a friend, that could be someone just trying to get my attention, and then I fortunately immediately respond by pummeling the person in the face and dealing blows that could potentially be fatal. It's definitely an escalation of the attacks and may not have been warranted. Additionally, after that, I then moved to a controlling technique. And at that point, I may not have incapacitated my opponent. I may have, but if I haven't, a controlling technique is certainly dangerous because it requires those fine motor skills that Sensei Hofmeister was just talking about. And if you don't execute it properly, you're definitely in danger of being attacked by your opponent. Certainly not a good thing to use with someone who's substantially larger than you as an opponent. And then finally, once I've incapacitated him and I've got him on the ground, I move in for another killing strike, an axe to the head or to some other part of the body, when I could have taken the opportunity to evade the attack and run away to safety. And that would probably be the most appropriate thing to do once you have an incapacitated opponent on the ground.
Now we're going to show a couple examples of self-defense routines that we like a little bit more.
Hey, did I see you looking at my girl over there?
Oh, whoa, hey! Yeah! Yeah! Hey, baby, where are you going?
I'm just trying to get with my friends.
I got a
sorry.
cool car. Come on, you want to see my car?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Come on, we're going to get the car!
No!
Hurt you? For the first routine, I was Tori, and Sensei Hines was Uke. In that circumstance, I started with my back to the wall, and the situation escalated very quickly, so I didn't have a chance to defuse, and since I was already to a wall, I couldn't evade. As soon as I saw the attacker was initiating an attack, I moved first so that my attack actually landed before the attackers did, and then the attacker continued to move towards me and initiated a grapple. I was able to take them down and do a quick strike, just enough to phase them to give me enough time to escape.
In the second routine, we tried to pick a typical story that I think a lot of women are concerned about. The idea that you're walking and that someone might try to drag you away or drag you into a car. So to illustrate one of the principles we talked about earlier though, we showed how it's very important that just because someone grabs your hand, that doesn't mean you have to respond immediately with a very violent or fatal attack. But once the person grabs you again, at that point, that's when the decision to attack really needs to be made. And so we responded very quickly with a very simple attack, one that doesn't require fine motor skills. And then once the person lunged in to try and take me to the ground, which could be presumed to be a pretty typical response, we used another very simple throw and then a simple finishing technique and ran away to evade and escape the attack. Too often, Sensei Hoffmeister and I see students who come to test or come to tournaments, and their self-defense routines look like they just picked a handful of cool defense moves that they liked and threw them together. But they're not particularly practical, and they don't show any evidence of real thought or into a storyline behind them. And so my best recommendation for you all moving forward with your self-defense routines is to really spend some time thinking about how this would play out in real life and coming up with realistic responses to those situations.
If you need help knowing what realistic situations might be, there are various videos on YouTube of people actually being in street fights where you can see how people respond when their physical safety is legitimately threatened. So we encourage you again to think about realistic scenarios, think about realistic attacks and defense and good timing as you're coming up with your self-defense routines.
Thank you so much for watching our video. We hope that you've enjoyed it and learned a lot about self-defense routines in Yoshukai Karate. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about Yoshukai Karate, you can visit Sensei Hoffmeister's website at athensy.com, or you can visit my website at clarkcountyYK.com. Thank you so much.